Hey, today we are going to review for our chemical bonds and reactions test. And this is for a grade, so I want you to pay close attention, but this is going to review pretty much everything about ionic and covalent compounds, as well as how to name them. Okay, so we are using DocHub here to edit this document. So if you're working at home, just be sure to use the same tools I'm using. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight a few key points about ionic compounds. Remember, binary just means two elements. So they contain two different elements. Two elements in an ionic compound would be a metal and a non-metal. So for example, sodium chloride or your table salt is an ionic compound because it is a metal and a non-metal. So metals form positive ions because they lose electrons, and positive ions are cations. Nonmetals are the anions, and they gain electrons and when they form compounds. So a combination of a cation and anion can form this ionic compound. To name them, we are going to write the name of the element that forms the cation first. That's the metal. That is the metal. Then we're going to follow with the name of the anion, which is the nonmetal. The name of the nonmetal is going to have like the first syllable, like chlor for chlorine. And then we are going to, it's going to be the first syllable with the suffix IDE. They will always have IDE for this purpose, this class. So AlCl, the name of our metal is aluminum. The name of our nonmetal is chlorine. So we would name it aluminum chloride. So go ahead and try to name these compounds right here. Remember, you can type capital A. And we're going to say we got the name of our metal, K. You can use your periodic table. The name of K is potassium. And then the name of the nonmetal I is iodine. But we're going to just put iodide. Okay. Also, we've got this one. The name of our metal is calcium. And the name of our nonmetal is chlorine. So we're going to put chlor and then IDE. Okay, so that's a good example of how we do ionic. Now, if we look at covalent, I'm going to go back to my highlighter. Covalent are very similar, but they contain two nonmetals and they share their electrons. They don't transfer. So the names of covalent compounds must include prefixes to show the number of atoms in the element. So we don't transfer charges here. We just use prefixes. So the first atom is named after the element. And if there are two or more in that first element, we use the prefix di, tri, tetra, or higher. The prefix mono is never used in the first element. That's a big one to remember. And all numerical prefixes, however, are used for the second element. So we can use mono in the second element. So it tells you how many you have of each. So for instance, we have 2 oxygens, we have dioxide, we have 3 fluorines, we have trifluoride. So the suffix IDE is then added to the end always. Okay, so let's try a few of these. We've got carbon and oxygen. I see I don't have more than one because there's no little number. And I know I can't put mono in the first spot. So I'm just going to write the first element first. So I'm going to write carbon. And then I see I only have one oxygen. In the second spot, I have to use a prefix for one. So I'm going to put monoxide. Monoxide. All right, so what about this one? This one has one silicon. We can't put mono in the first spot, so I'm just going to write silicon. And then we have 2 oxygens. The prefix for 2 is di. So I'm going to write dioxide. All right, now let's do this one right here because I see we have more than one in the first spot. You're going to fill in all these on your own, but I do want to do this one with you. So we have 2 hydrogens, so dihydrogen. And we only have 1 oxygen, so that's going to be mono for the prefix oxide. Okay, so we always use a prefix unless there is just one in the first spot. Okay, so I'm going to come down to the ionic compounds. You're going to do this on your own, but I do want to talk about, remember ionic, we just named the metal, nonmetal, and IDE. But we want the formula right here. So remember, in order to find the formula, we have to find the charge and then cross them. So what I need to do is find the charge for both. So I know that my charge on sodium, I have to write this here, and I think it'll be helpful for you. The charge on sodium is, here's sodium, +1. Okay, so +1. And remember, if you need this, just Google periodic table with charges. And the charge on bromine, so we got bromide, Br right here, is -1. So I'm going to do a little thing here, and it is going to be -1. Okay, I know it looks kind of odd, but now we need the formula right here. Okay, so we've got +1 and -1. If they are the same, we don't have to write them. So I'm going to write just the element symbol NaBr. All right, now let's look at calcium and chlorine and see if it's the same way. The charge on calcium is Ca is going to be +2. So I'm going to write a +2. And then the charge on chlorine is right here, -1. Okay, so if you notice right there for our charges, we have +2 and -1. So because ionic bonds transfer their electrons, we're going to transfer the charges. So calcium is going to get the 1, chlorine is going to get the 2. So calcium is going to get the 1, so I'm just not going to write anything, and chlorine is going to get the 2. Okay, so that's how you do all of these. Just be sure you have the charges and that you cross them. Okay, now let's go down here. These for ionic, whenever you see a metal, you know it's ionic. To write the name, it is very simple because we just write the metal, the nonmetal, and ide. So the metal here, K, is for potassium. You can look at your periodic table. Potassium. O is for oxygen, and I just put IDE, oxide. Right here, same thing. Name of the metal, Mg, is magnesium. I is iodine, so I'm just put IDE on the end, iodide. All right, and that is for ionic. It's going to be really important that you remember you have to look and see if it's a metal and a nonmetal. If it is a metal, you use these rules. And if it's not, if it's two nonmetals, we're going to use our covalent rules. Okay, so here I give you some examples of how we would name covalent compounds. First thing you want to do is look at these two elements and see if they are covalent. So I see carbon and dioxide, so carbon and oxygen. I can look at my periodic table. I can see carbon and oxygen are both nonmetals. So I know I'm going to use covalent rules. And I want the formula. Now this is really easy for covalent because I see carbon. There's no prefix, so I just have 1. And then I see dioxide, so I have O2. Phosphorus triiodide. So I have phosphorus, which is going to be P. Triiodide means I have 3 iodines, so I3. All right, and right here, when we are naming these covalent compounds, I just look at the numbers. Now, if I have N and F, I'm going to make sure they're covalent. N and F are both nonmetals, so okay, I'm going to use covalent. I'm going to use prefixes. So I have 2 nonmetals. I can use prefixes. So I've got 2 N's, so dinitrogen. And I've got 4 fluorines. So I come up here my thing, and 4 is tetra. So it'd be tetrafluoride. And I spelled it wrong. Can make it longer so it fits there. All right, and then we could look at this one right here. Below it, we have S with no number behind it, so I'm going to assume there's just 1. And I can't write mono in the first spot, so I'm going to write sulfur. And then it says 4 chlorine, so tetrafluoride. Remember, your prefixes are right here. Okay, so down at the bottom, we are going to not do number 1, but other than that, you are going to decide, is it ionic or covalent? If it's ionic, name it with ionic. If it's covalent, name it with covalent. So let's start right here. Going to tell whether it's ionic or covalent first. In number 2, I see carbon and oxygen. So I come back to my periodic table. Carbon and oxygen are both nonmetals. So I'm going to say this is both nonmetal, so it's covalent. And how do I name it with covalent? I use prefixes. So I can't use a prefix in the first spot because there's only 1. So I'm just going to write carbon. And then I've got 1 oxygen. Remember, I can use my prefix for 1 in the second spot. So I'm going to write monoxide. And spelling is not super important, so don't stress. Right here, let's look at this and see if it's ionic or covalent. PCl3. P is over here, Cl is over here, both nonmetals, so it's going to be covalent. I'm going to name it. So remember, there's no room for mono in the first spot, so I'm just going to write phosphorus. And then I have 3 chlorines, so my prefix for 3 is trichloride. All right, now let's look at this one right here, Ki. So if I look at Ki, I see I have a metal and a nonmetal. That means it's not covalent. It is ionic. And remember, when we name ionic, we are going to use these rules. Okay, for ionic, we just write the metal, nonmetal, and ide. So I'm going to write the name of the metal. K is potassium. And then iodide. All right, so go through, decide if they're ionic or covalent. If they are ionic, just write the metal, nonmetal, ide. If they are covalent, use prefixes. All right, have a good day.